Okay, we're here with Rod and Denise Hilden today with the Born Again series, looking at real conversion stories of actual Christians and what their process was to come to an understanding of the truth and to follow Christ and to be baptized into him. And so I'm really excited to have Rod and Denise with us. There's a lot of reasons for that. One is just the quality of people they are. I have never in my life known any harder working Christians who are more involved in the lives of others than these two people. I have known them for years, and they have been a blessing to every person that they've ever come in contact with. I'm also excited because they bring something to the table we haven't really talked about in this series of interviews, which is Catholicism. They came from a background of Catholicism, and that's something that I think if you haven't experienced, it may feel a little foreign to you. So to be able to talk to them, I think is they have a perspective that is really valuable. And so Rod, Denise are members of the congregation here at Monroe Valley, and Rod's one of our deacons. And like I said, just the kind of people you want to get to know. Just purely selfishly, one of the reasons that I have enjoyed doing this series is a chance to introduce people I care about to other people I care about. And so Rod and Denise, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I know that the tech side of this is probably maybe a little bit outside of your normal comfort zone, but I appreciate you being willing to do it. Would you, maybe we just start with this, just maybe give us a little bit of the background for each of you of, maybe your families and growing up and, just, briefly, before you started studying the Bible, and becoming Christians, what was your religious background and your life together beforehand?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for being interested in our story. It's fun to be able to tell it again. In fact, as Denise and I were kind of going over it, you have to kind of call to mind, these are stories that are 40 years ago, so 45 years ago, and so it conjured up memories that we had as well, just to try and remember what we were going to say today. But I'll start with my background, which was not actually Catholic, it was Lutheran, and I come from a Norwegian family. I think the thing that was unique about almost my grandparents and my parents is they called themselves Lutheran, but weren't regularly attending a Lutheran church. And they didn't really do so until they had some children. And as we'll see later on, that was fundamentally what drew Denise and I to studying the religion, then the Catholic religion, because of our children. We were having our first child, and we wanted, religion was important enough to us in our lives. We wanted to be sure that we could adequately convey it to our children so that they would have the same appreciation for God and faith. In my immediate family, my dad, well, let me back up a little bit. Lutheranism to me was more of a social type of a religion. It didn't demand that you go every Sunday. And oftentimes the people that were in those worship services weren't really acting in any way other than sitting and listening. There was no activity associated with it. And that was one of the things that I kind of felt like, well, are Lutherans really convicted? Are they really believing what they're hearing? And so I stayed in the Lutheran church with my parents until I went away to college. And then as I was in college, I met a friend who was actually studying to be a seminarian, which eventually would lead to them becoming a priest.
Okay.
And I really was attracted to Catholicism because I went to church with him, and I saw people who were really acting out their faith. To me, it was appealing to think of, going into church, genuflecting in front of the cross, the church as you came in, making the sign of the cross on your chest. And there were certain times in the service they got down on their knees, and there was a little thing they could.
So it felt more participatory than what you'd experienced.
Oh yeah, and here it seemed like people were much more committed.
Okay.
And the thing, you know, I can well remember on Christmas Mass where you go at midnight, and the organ would be rumbling in the background, the choir would be singing, and it would just stand up the hairs on the back of your neck of just like, whoa, this is really feeling holy and important. And so after several conversations with the friend, I went over and was assigned a nun that taught me, at a conversion series, taught me about Catholicism, and I converted. And this is before I met Denise. Many people convert, you know, it was someone that they're going to be married to. I had decided to do that well before I met Denise. So I then became Catholic, I guess, and was new to Catholicism. And I think I'll let Denise tell her background because she basically was raised in the church, not a recent convert like I was when I was in college.
Okay, yeah. So you convert in college, Denise. For you, it was earlier.
Yeah, my parents were both Catholic. My dad had been adopted, but part of the condition for him in the adoption was that they continued to raise him Catholic.
Okay.
And they were actually Episcopalian, which I think is probably pretty close. My mom is the second generation European immigrant, and her aunts, some of them were in convents back in France. So her family was very Catholic. And when they married and had kids, they both believed strongly in higher education, which Catholicism had all those private schools. So between the two of them, my dad was a very devout, godly man. And he practiced his Catholicism, and he took all of his kids to church regularly. And my mom was very into higher education and the income that you could earn by doing that. So we both had this commonality. She wasn't religious as much as he was, but we did practice and we did go, and we were sent to Catholic schools until we got too older. The schools weren't available.
So your dad, it was more of a spiritual side of it. Your mom, it sounded more practical, just like this is a good pathway for productive life.
Right. And my mom, I didn't know it at the time, but my mom was mentally ill. So she brought a lot of instability to our family. It was dysfunctional, but my dad was very good and stable, and they didn't want to talk about that. But the Catholic Church kind of had a different role than I think most people encounter. I almost saw it as the routine and stability of a parent. Mm. So I was invested in Catholicism.
They were a consistency in your life.
Right, right. And to have all the rules and to have the absolutes of black and white like they projected it, those were all good things for me as a kid.
Okay. Okay.
So Dad was a very honorable guy, and I believed anything he said. So I went with him. I had no doubt about where he was at because he was a very good person.
So is it fair to say that both of you had a positive attitude towards Catholicism? It wasn't like, okay, you really had a lot of deep negative experiences. For Rod, you converted to Catholicism. Right. And for Denise, for you, it was a positive element to your upbringing. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you both meet. Do you meet at the Catholic Church? Do you meet and then find out that you're Catholic? Is that a totally separate story?
Well, Denise was attending a college in Vancouver, Washington, and I was here in Seattle at the University of Washington. We actually met when I went home for Thanksgiving and got to know each other. And as our relationship developed, we were interested in marriage. It just happened to coincidentally be good because we were both the same faith and both felt strongly about that faith. So at that point, we were happy being Catholic, and at that point, not necessarily eager to know more about it. But that was about to change when we were deciding we're going to have kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny too, because I was dating one of Rod's best friends from his neighborhood. And I think that's how we met. And the first time I remember really meeting him, he was wearing a fake mustache that had come unglued and tipped sideways. So, I mean, there is some humor to this whole thing.
And you guys just very recently celebrated your 49th anniversary. So, I mean, that's a pretty big milestone. That in and of itself, I think, is something that people need to realize, is that, there good, solid marriages exist. People who are happily married, for decades and decades. And so fake mustache, you survived that, got married. And then as you were preparing to have children, so that's what kind of brought the religion question to the forefront again.
Right.
Yes,
And I think there were a few things leading up to that I remember Denise expressed to me. One was an example of not eating meats on Friday, which was a Catholic requirement. And many Catholics still today eat fish or avoid meats, some vegetable or something.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, it was considered a mortal sin to partake of meat on Friday. And she had, I can't remember, it was an uncle or something that had defied that. He said, no way, I'm going to eat what I want to eat. And so mortal sin meant at the end of your life, you're not going to heaven, you're going to hell. And so I remember her expressing that to me when we were just, somewhere in our first years of marriage, about my uncle, has had this issue, and I felt so badly about it. And then in 1966, and I think it was closely in the late 60s, there was a declaration from the church that the Pope had changed his mind. Now, the Pope, as far as Catholics are concerned, speak infallibly the word of God. Mm-hmm. So they were frequent to come around and say, God's changed his mind on this. And I'm here to tell you that you can now eat meat on Fridays. And it's all related to kind of that was, according to their history, when Christ was crucified. And that was a recognition of kind of fasting from meat, which most people ate in those days at their meal, especially their evening meal. And so, here's this revelation, and Denise kind of going, so what happened to my uncle? Because he had passed, and he had passed when it was a mortal sin. So is he in heaven, or since God's changed his mind, is he in hell or heaven? And so just one of those kind of strange dichotomies of, well, what's the answer here? And of course, the Catholic Church wasn't too interested in those kind of questions. And so it just kind of stuck in her head about, here's somebody I love that's in my family. I don't know what's happened to him. Mm-hmm. But Denise and I have always had, I guess, what I would call kind of a well-planned out marriage. When we took some time deciding what it was going to mean to be married. For instance, we decided in the first 4 or 5 years, we were not going to have children because fundamentally we want to make sure, is this going to be a good fit? Are we going to be able to stay married? I mean, not that we didn't think we could, but we just didn't want to, have children as an additional concern, as many people that divorce, and then what happens to the kids. So we spent 4 or 5 years making sure that we were a good fit, as we called it, and then decided, all right, it's time to start the family. We're very confident that we get along well together. We've each found our own soulmate here, and we're ready to do it. But we need to make some decisions about how we're going to be able to teach our first child or subsequent children that would come into our marriage. And even prior to that, we were having to deal with a dilemma that a great number of young Catholics were, and that was birth control. And it was, what are you going to do about birth control? Because the Catholic Church taught that also was a mortal sin, that if you did anything in your sexual relations to avoid pregnancy, you would be going to hell too. It's a mortal sin. And so as a result, in Catholic Church, I mean, frequently Denise and I come in for services, what they call the Mass, sit there, and then right in front of us would come children, maybe, 8, 9, 10 children. Father'd come in very proudly, sit down, all very well-dressed children, and then in come mom kind of straggling in because she had been pregnant every single year of their marriage. They didn't exercise any birth control, and so they had a child that represented every year of their marriage. And so that, that also was of concern to us about we weren't quite ready and certainly weren't financially capable of having children at that point in time. This was early on in their marriage.
But we were both in school.
Yeah, well, that's right. We were both still in college.
So you had some real practical questions that became hurdles that you're like, wait a second, we didn't really think about this. What about my uncle? And now this rule change, what does that mean for him? And that's a practical rubber meets the road question. Where's he at? And then with birth control and the Catholic policies on that. So there are some questions at this stage that have kind of arisen in your mind, but not necessarily enough to make you stop being Catholic, but they are unanswered questions. Is that a fair way to put that?
Absolutely. And very important to us as a young couple just getting married. And so, everybody, a young person in the Catholic Church was sort of struggling with this. Some were absolute. You couldn't take, I think the pill came out around 1960, but they were still concerned about it. When we were, these were in the early or mid 70s. It would have been the start of the 70s for us because we were married in 1971. As to what are you going to do about this? Because it's going to affect us directly.
Sure.
If we're doing the wrong thing, then we'll be guilty of mortal sin. So anyway, lots of discussion about it. And our home church in Vancouver and the Catholic church I was attending up here were fundamentally opposed to any form of birth control. What we found later is Denise finished her 2 years in the college she was at in Vancouver and moved up into the Seattle area. And we found that there were both conservative and liberal Catholic churches. And the Catholic Church right around the university had a whole different viewpoint.
Mm.
And they were fundamentally, hey, it's a matter of conscience. We're not going to tell you exactly what to do, but we're going to leave it as a matter of conscience. And that was actually what the Catholic Church finally put out about it, is it's a matter of conscience. And of course, everybody that was young swung to that persuasion that, okay, it's all right then. And we can, not have to worry about all the different ways one can avoid or can have contraception or avoid it. And so, again, we were kind of thinking, well, how could this be that God's confused about the very basic thing of human life, about whether you have babies or not?
Right.
And on what basis? And so, again, it just seemed confusing because, we believe that God is constant. He can figure out his mind. He's going to tell us up front, and it's not going to change.
And instead, you're kind of seeing the opposite of it. Seems like there is a lot of question and confusion as to what's right and what's wrong.
Well, there's also
as culture changes.
We were young, so what were we, in our 20s? And so our mindset was a little bit rebellious. But the other thing was that I had always been taught as a Catholic that the priest did all the decision making, that you ask him. He was the specialist, just like you go to a lawyer or you go to a doctor, and they have a specialty in these areas, and you confer with them and they tell you how it is. Well, in the Catholic Church, you go to a Catholic priest and they're the ones that give you answers. You don't have to spend a lot of time. In fact, you're not really supposed to spend a lot of time researching what God's idea is on it, because they're the filter that you deal with between you and God. And so it wasn't like we could ask all sorts of questions. It wasn't acceptable to
you just had to accept the answer you were given. This is the answer. And then to find out that other Catholic churches were giving different answers, I imagine that's kind of feels contradictory as well.
It did feel contradictory, but because of our age and because of we were busy in school, it was like, oh, okay, we'll go there. Right. You know what I mean? We should have said why and really researched it, but we were so busy with life, we found an answer that worked for us and we went on with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was confusing and it wasn't right, but it didn't get our attention like it should have.
Well, like so many things in life, right? You're just kind of bumping along, and in hindsight, you go, that was a pretty big deal. But at the time, it just felt probably just as part of you're just kind of wending through life and trying to figure it out. And hindsight's a little bit stronger sometimes with that. But so when and who became your guys' first contact for Christianity? What was it through Rod? Was it through Denise? Which one of you was the kind of the driving force? I find that a lot of times when you're talking to a couple, there's often a gas and a brake. And so who's the gas and who's the brake?
Well, I can probably launch into that. And I might just add, though, before I do, that the whole basis of the Catholic Church throughout its history is to not encourage people to read the Bible. The priests are there to interpret the Bible and tell you what it means. And so since that's not encouraged, we aren't doing that as a regular basis when we're Catholics. And the irony there is oftentimes even some of the Catholic churches we attended when we were young were all in Latin. And so if you didn't know Latin, you're just repetitively repeating what the priest is saying. And you just don't fully understand what's going on in the service, but you're doing it every Sunday in and out. Mm-hmm. And so you just kind of, you're supposed to accept this stuff. And I remember when I was converting to be Catholic, I remember thinking, like, these people really show their Catholicism, show their love for God. They're not just sitting around waiting for the banquet to start in the church kitchen, which a lot of people did in Lutheran church. But from the numbers and cathedrals that are located internationally throughout the world, there's a vast network of Catholic Church. I remember thinking, there's no way this can be wrong. There's too many people who are Catholics and committed to it. So nonetheless, we're going along through life, and we have our first child, and we're struggling at that time, trying to get some kind of further insight into the Catholic Church. And I guess we hadn't had our first child when we were studying initially, but we went to our priest of that particular church and asked him to study with us. And I remember kind of thinking, and we knew this guy, and we thought, oh, this is going to be neat to be able to meet with him. I'll never forget his response. Well, I got too full of a schedule to be able to do this with you, because Monday's my day off and Tuesday is, and then Wednesday I got to go to Rotary. Thursday I've got a regular group I play golf with, and on Friday is just open for Fridays and Saturdays are weddings and funerals. I just don't have a day available for you. And I'm thinking, hey, we're really got questions about the church. We may, want to do something different. I'm thinking, I'm kind of desperate almost for this. And well, I'm sorry, I just can't fit you in, but we have what's called a layperson, which is somebody who's not a priest, but is in a position of some authority to explain it. And although I studied with a nun, this person is a layperson. And right away we start, okay, when can we get with this layperson and start talking with them? And the very first person we get, Denise and I sit down with them, and we kind of start going through, hey, we need to know more about the Catholic Church and prepare for our first child, and going over some of the things. And I remember we kind of kept coming back to, well, what about, when it says call no one father in the Bible, and yet we have a father that's the priest in charge of the church, and then just go through any number of different things, abstaining from meat on Fridays, all the variety of different things. I remember one that struck me was the unleavened bread and fruit of the vine, which is in their communion. The Catholics kind of ring a little bell, and that they believe that transforms to the full blood and body, flesh, at the point when you take communion. And I'm kind of looking, and it doesn't appear to be changing to me, but and they aren't saying it's symbolic; they say it's real. And then of course
transubstantiation.
Right.
Yeah. And then of course denying marriage for priests and nuns and just any number of different things. Well, right away, I get just a shotgun blast from this lady. I mean, whenever she interacts with me, it's just like she's ready to hammer me with a bat. And when she interacts with Denise, it's like a whole different person. And, we're just kind of like, well, wow, this isn't an interaction. It's almost like a verbal fight. And then we find out later when I talk to the priest about, is this the only lay person you've got? Because we seem to be arguing more than trying to find truth. And, oh, well, she's just come out of a recent divorce and she hates men. Oh, well, that would have been nice to know before we started. So he assigns us to someone else. But we, again, just, they approach everything so broadly. And finally, we kind of just said, listen, we're trying to understand what the Bible says the church should be by going to chapter and verse reference. That's really what we're after. And I remember her saying, if you're after chapter and verse and everything, we're never going to get anywhere.
Wow.
And
this is before any actual contact with anybody outside of the Catholic Church at this point. This is just you guys just kind of just wrestling with it.
I think it was during the time that we were pregnant with Bryce that we started thinking of questions and wanting to do something, because we wanted to be able to teach. And, we wanted to iron out how to approach this. Because, I mean, like I said, we've been told what to think, but we hadn't done any thinking on our own. So
fair enough.
The parents, and we were supposed to be teaching the young person, and we just wanted to get access to be able to do that reasoning with the son.
And we're just struggling, trying to sit down and help reason with us to understand the Mother Catholic Church. What are the major opinions of it, and how are the things in the Bible balanced against it? But I remember her saying, we're not going to go chapter and verse with you. The Catholic Church is a church of tradition, and you have to follow the traditions of the church. The traditions of the church are what modernize and make the church fresh.
And she also said, the only two things you have to believe to be Catholic is that the Pope is infallible and the Ascension of Mary. It was the strangest thing, and she was mad when she said it. She was mad at us.
And then fundamentally, everybody gave up on us. We couldn't even get meetings with the layperson. We were told that we were lacking in faith and needed to have more faith to really resolve these things.
So at the end of these conversations, when they essentially cut it off, did you guys cease to be Catholic at that point? Did you continue in Catholicism and just say, okay, I guess this is as far as we're going to go, but we'll just accept it? Where were you at?
Well, we had no other place to go.
Okay.
To me, and I assume Denise too, it was still the church. We were just dealing with people who weren't able to defend it or weren't interested in defending it, but still it was the mother church to us. And we were not looking, at least I wasn't, for something else. I was looking to understand it better. If these people can't explain it to me, then we've got to find a way to get it explained to us, because again, we're just, like Denise says, she's pregnant and we got something to explain to our child.
I kept looking. I remember one time my mom and I went to a underground prayer service, and it was a priest who had kind of gone, I don't know what you call, kind of rogue, there's the word. And we went into this place and the lights were all off and there were candles everywhere, and this priest was leading, it almost felt like a seance kind of sense. He was leading prayers, but it was all this ambiance, and that didn't go very well with me either. I mean, I couldn't ask questions, and it was just another view of the weirdness of what we were encountering. But I kept looking, and God in his infinite wisdom, after Bryce was born, sent a public health nurse to our neighborhood. And there were a group of us new mothers in that neighborhood that had wanted a class to learn about raising little people.
Okay.
And we ended up with a group of mothers. One was a Pentecostal, one was a Jehovah's Witness, I was the Catholic, And my friend Tanya was an ex-Catholic. She had now converted to Christianity, and she lived about 2 blocks away. So God threw this little cog into the works, and
Charismatic almost.
yeah, charismatic. And so I had an access to ask all sorts of questions to all sorts of groups. I mean, the Jehovah's Witness, and we met, I don't remember how many times, but it allowed me to start asking them different things. And I really, really got attached to Tanya, the one that was the ex-Catholic that had converted to Christianity. And her son was 1 day older than my son, or younger. And the two of them became very good friends. And she was a type of person that did very well with evangelism. She was very driven. So I had a grandma, the French Catholic grandma, that passed away, and she knew it. And she asked me, well, where do you think your grandma went? And I said, heaven. And she says, well, why do you think that? Well, I had to start digging. Why did I think that? Well, because she was Catholic. She was always Catholic. She had sisters and brothers, you know, that were clergy in the Catholic Church. And so Tanya just kept dropping these little questions in that made me have to think. And then it wasn't too long after that that I eliminated the Jehovah's Witness, I eliminated the charismatic, I eliminated the other people because I was really drawn to what she was telling me. And because she had answers, she wasn't afraid of questions. She had no fear whatsoever. Every question I had was a good question. And that really impressed me because I was becoming very distrustful of Catholicism. I felt betrayed and I wanted answers. And she said, sure, let's look at that. Everything I said was, let's look at that. And then our friend that we met through Tanya, Larry Haverstock, was a preacher training guy. He lived across the street from Tanya. He'd been in construction and he'd fallen off the roof of some house and wrecked his shoulder. So he was on this medical break.
Well, actually, he was carrying a sheet of plywood on the roof of a house they were building, and the wind came up and he flew off the roof.
Ooh.
And broke his arm.
Oh, was that what it was?
Hurt himself badly, yeah.
Sheet of plywood does not make for a good parachute.
Well, or sail.
Yeah, right.
So God has planted Tanya right there in my lap with this insatiable curiosity and this drive to now get answers. And she's very willing to give me any answers I want. Just open that Bible. Let's take a look at that Bible. And I brought my Bible, which was a Catholic Bible with all the extra silly books and the different translation. And she had her Bible. And then Larry fell off the roof and broke his arm. And then the next thing you know, Larry had time to come study with us, with me first. And I went through all of these things with both of them. And I'd come home with these wonderful notes and I would show them to Rod. And Rod was sitting there thinking, now we're a very happy family. And if we divide up between the two, if she becomes a Christian and I'm a Catholic, there's going to be friction there. And he didn't say that then. He just,
At first, I just, sitting there kind of going, as I'm hearing this at the dinner table, thinking this, it's fine, she needs to go out and do Bible studies, and part of the new mothers thing, she's all learning about being a mother and having fun, getting together and drinking tea and studying the Bible. That's great. Everything's fine because it doesn't seem to be really going anywhere, other though she keeps coming up with questions. And to me, I'm not even taking it serious enough on some of the questions. It's just like, okay, well, there's an answer for that. Fine, go ahead and study it. It's not till Larry comes into the group that things really start to dramatically change into this group of people who are studying. And Larry is just as Tanya was, more or able to address the Bible subjects. I mean, he doesn't even have to look them up. He's like, okay, the answer to that is over here in chapter and verse. And we're like, all of a sudden, the whole speed of this thing picks up. And
that's hard on you.
And I feel very threatened.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like the Mother Church is being threatened. We haven't even had a chance to understand the Mother Church. And now my wife is off And it's fine to have a little Bible study, but now she's questioning the Catholic Church and seriously questioning things. And so I'm feeling very vulnerable because I myself don't have the answers. And but yet, you know, I kind of encourage her, yeah, keep going, have those things, those little study sessions. That's fine. Glad to hear you got some questions. We'll work it all out. And until she comes home with something that just really sets me off, and it's a map that Larry has drawn. And we actually we kept that along.
I love that you kept it.
I think it's got to be up a little bit. I don't know that
45 years
this can be
ago.
seen, but there's a road going from south to north, and that arrow in the middle. Can you see it? Okay.
Yeah, I can see it.
Oh,
Yeah. So
okay.
the arrow in the middle. What does
Yeah,
that represent?
And I turned to Denise, and she says, "This is so and so that's over here. That's zinging off the side. Here's somebody that's running up the road, in the gutter, out of the gutter, all over the place. And then this middle arrow." And I said, "No, don't tell me. It's Larry, isn't it?" And she said, "Yeah, he's going up the middle of the road. He's on the highway." And I said, "Okay, that's it."
Just a minute, let me explain. This is the narrow way, just like the Bible says. And this
Yeah, okay.
So it's right out of scripture. We're reading it, but verbatim, I'm telling them about it.
So
Larry has essentially dropped the gauntlet, right? At this point,
yeah.
He said, "I'm going to heaven, and all of these other ways, they're not working." Right?
The others are going to hell. There's
and I am just
day of judgment right there.
I'm just infuriated by this. I mean, I'm ready to go and take him out. And I said, "Okay,
Denise, just so you know, we're losing you got there you go." Yeah, so, perfect. But so you're infuriated by it because this guy, have you met personally? Had you met Larry at that point, or was she just?
I've just heard about him.
Your wife just comes home, has been having conversations with this guy. She's talking, and oh, by the way, Larry's going to heaven, and by implication, you're not, and that's
And there's just, you know, and she's on fire about this. She's all full of questions and answers that she's just learned, and look at this in the Bible and that. And I'm thinking, we've got to find our way back to understanding this in a Catholic way. And it's obviously she's been really influenced by what he's told her. So I said, "That's it. I don't want you going to any more of these things without me." And we're going to shift from, you did it on a weekday. I think we shifted it over to a Saturday night. And I said, just wait. I'm going to take this guy on. And
you said you were going to take him out.
Take him out. Okay. Well, that too. And, and so Denise is like, "Okay, it's all set for Saturday night." So this is all like just down the road from our house. We walk over there on Saturday night and sit down. And I remember the very first question that Larry asked me was, from my own personal perspective, what was my source of authority for religious things? Well, it's the Bible, of course. And I remember him smiling and saying, "Yes, it is." And
gotcha.
He had you, and you didn't even know it yet.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he said, "Well, have you got a Bible?" "Yeah, I do." "Well, let's open it up and start going through it." And so these sessions probably went about an hour and a half each time. And we sat down, went through this thing, and I listened and I took notes. And then the hour and a half came around, and we said, "Well, thank you very much." And we packed up, and Denise and I are walking home. And she goes, "I thought she was going to take him out." And I said, "That's coming. I'm letting him kind of, you know, think he's doing okay. And I've got all this stuff down. I'm going to, you know, go through it, study it myself. And we'll go back next Saturday, and I'll take him out." So she goes, "Okay." And so next Saturday rolls around, we come back, and we started a series of questions, because we would go home and think, well, if this is that way, then this leads to this. What's the answer to this question? And so we'd come back with easily 2 sheets of handwritten questions, come back and kind of go through that. And Larry would just very systematically go through them. This is what the Bible says about this. This is what the Bible says about that. And, we go through that, write down the answers, and sooner, the meeting would be over, an hour and a half. And again, we're walking home, and Denise said, are you about ready to take him out? And
is
I
it
said,
time? Are you still?
I need more ammunition.
Well, the thing is, Larry did. He would say, that is really a good question. He rebuilt our trust.
Mhm.
So we could not ask a bad question. He was so open. He said, let's look at that. And to make sure he knew he was getting our attention, that we were feeling comfortable, he'd have us read it. He didn't even read it to us. He'd have us read it so that we knew what we read was what was said.
Okay.
I mean, he could tell that we had been mistreated by the Catholic Church, that we had a lot of distrust, a lot of anger, and weren't going to be bought off real easily, even if it made logical sense. He must have been able to tell that, because he never ever evaded anything.
So he just picked up on your need for transparency,
Mhm.
and so he provided it. And then every time you study, so I think you kind of answered this already, but it wasn't a systematic study through things. It was really, you came with questions and he would answer them, and then you'd come with more questions and he'd answer them. And so that's week after week after week.
Yeah.
How many weeks is this?
Well, I know it was 32 hours because Larry counted it, but I don't remember if that was 32 weeks. I think it was less in weeks.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's say it's even 25 weeks or something like that. I mean, you are 6 months in, roughly, something like
we
that.
got more classes as it built. We did it more often because there was no way I could wait
But
a
it
week.
started out once a week, and then I think we did it twice a week.
Okay.
We did it. And I don't want to misrepresent this, that these were real argumentative meetings. We were very, we sat down to listen to it, and Larry was very, very gentle in his answers. He wasn't
Diplomatic.
He wasn't assertive. He wasn't. I was the one that wanted to fight, although I didn't attack him. I just was listening. But he was a very patient guy, and every single thing we came up with, I think there's only one or two questions. He'd say, let me think about that, and I'll do it next time. And sure enough, we'd start out next time with that question, and he'd deal with it. And so we just kept going and going and going, and we still have. We were looking for him for this talk today, but I think we still have the binders and things of the questions we asked, and what his answers were. So we had compiled quite a bit of information, and it just was an amazing amount of time. And so my anger quickly grew to appreciation and trust in him and love for him today. But it took some time. And when I realized that we didn't have the truth, that he had the truth in the Bible, and that's where it really changed over for me. But it was an extensive amount of time, and we would every single session just pepper him with one question after another. And again, it didn't follow a logical course. It was just kind of like hopping around, spidering to different subjects and things that they'd come up to us that we'd like to get answered.
But the overarching thing at the end is you have confidence there's a Bible answer for every question.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
We
wasn't
finally
afraid.
get somebody who'll go chapter and verse with it.
He wasn't afraid at all to open it up and take as long as we needed to wade through everything, show us different versions. I got to tell you, Rod is trained and has quite a talent for negotiations and understanding the psychology of salesmanship and people. Interrogation, I guess is another word. And I kept expecting him to be able to find the little thing that I didn't understand and grab Larry and pull that thread and reveal. It never happened.
Well, no, it actually did happen.
You didn't reveal.
Because there was one time he was responding to one of our questions, and he said, it's over here in this chapter and verse. And I said, no, it isn't. And he says, it isn't? And I said, no, in this verse it says this. And he says, what kind of Bible do you have? And I said, a Jerusalem Bible, which is a Catholic Bible.
Right.
And then we discovered that the Catholics had changed the Bible. And so they had conformed the Bible to meet their own purposes in that particular verse we were discussing. And he said, you don't have an accurate translation.
So we
And
had to
so then
deal
we
with that.
went off and tried to study, well, what is the most accurate translation? And the Catholics had made their own Bible to suit their own needs.
Gotcha.
And that's
So-
why it took 32 hours.
So I didn't
Right.
really get him, but
You thought you had, right?
yeah.
Yeah. And so at some point, do you run out of questions? Like how's that work? At some point, do you just does he say that's it, no more questions, or do you just go, we're out? I mean, did he? How did that work? How do you get to the end of that 32 hours and you guys being faced with, I guess, a decision at that point?
Larry is a very good person with salesman closing. He did do all the answers. He asked us if we wanted to, had any more questions. And he'd basically gone through kind of our good news cards in his own mind. He had,
Okay.
you know, I mean, we bounced around, but he had picked those things, those points, authority, the church, how it's passed down. And he had come to a close where you say, so do you want to be baptized?
Mm-hmm.
And he had answered everything. And he had come to the close.
And we
and
had
said,
no more questions.
we had no
And
more questions.
so he just flat out asked you, do you want to be baptized?
Yes, he
Yeah,
did.
Okay.
Well, he probably did that for the majority of the sessions we were in after we reached a certain point.
Okay.
Because we had, we
I
go
don't
back with more
remember any till the
questions.
end.
And then, while he was waiting, do we have any more questions? Then he asked, do you want to be baptized? Yeah.
So this last one, he did ask it. And I remember thinking, yes, I want to be baptized, but I'm married to this man and he's not speaking. And of course, he doesn't ever let the salesman do the close on him. He will walk away and he will analyze the whole thing over and take his 3 days of choice before he, makes an action. And we got home and I said, I want to be baptized. I need to be baptized. What about you? And he had to think about it because he kept thinking, this guy closed on me. I don't let salesmen pull that, I don't let him get to the close.
And I don't do it with emotions, which
Mm-hmm.
emotions weren't really there other than I knew that I needed to be baptized too. I just couldn't let him push me at an end of a session like that, that I wanted it to be an informed choice, that I was free from any distraction, free from that moment, that I could reflect back on it and say, okay, yeah, this is the right thing to do. And of course, Denise helped me by saying,
We're going.
So to recap, Larry spends 32 hours studying with you, answering every question you could possibly have, then asks you if you want to be baptized, and you stare him right in the face and say no.
Yeah. Which I don't know if you also saw on your screen, but it says your battery is low. So I don't know.
Oh, I didn't see that, but okay. So, well, we're almost wrapping up here anyways, but yeah, so that means the computer you're using its battery is low. So we live in a tech world. So
well, anyway, we'll try and finish up here quickly, but we are both home and Denise says that, and I say, well, I do too. And we call back. Actually, I think he walked home because we phoned, and when he goes home, we do want to be baptized. And so we went down to the church building and got baptized. And I remember Larry was saying afterwards, well, this is so great, and now you're gonna, now that you're baptized, you can be members of the church here. And we said, stop, no, we're not gonna be members. And I remember the disappointment on his face, because we had been burned badly by religion in the past. And I still wasn't ready to jump in and accept the Church of Christ as being the Church of the Bible. And I said, we're going to be guests. We're going to sit and watch and make sure that it's consistent with the Bible, and then we'll consider placing membership. And then I remember sort of smiling and say, hey, that's fine by me. We both saw the Church of Christ as a place that we could study and certainly find the truth, but we both didn't want to get burned again without really reflecting strongly as to what is the right church.
Mm-hmm.
And since we hadn't been to church there, we wanted to actually see it firsthand and make sure that it was consistent with the Bible and following, New Testament Christian examples.
And he enrolled us in Ephesians right away. That was our first book. It was the most exciting thing we've ever done. The book of Ephesians about the church, and Lowell teaching it with all of its richness. And then we were enveloped by the saints in that group, the Grimeses and several other families, Larry, Tanya, and they just kept us close. You know what I mean? They invited us over. They made sure we were brought in, and we placed membership. How long after? It took us a while to trust, is what it was.
It was probably 3 weeks to a month or something like that. But then after that, here we are, we've got the truth, and I've got to get back together with my friend who's just about ready to become a priest. He's a seminarian that I talked with originally to become Catholic. And so I go back and ask, hey, we got to get together. I've got something very important to tell you. And I remember, we got together over coffee and told him, my experience and chapter and verse and all these different things that are inconsistent in the Bible for Catholicism. And I remember him saying, Rod, I've had to study Catholicism a lot, and I'm going to become a priest. And I said, I know. That's why I'm so desperate for you to have this information. I mean, it's bad enough being Catholic, but if you're going to be a priest too, and encourage people and represent them as Catholic, you've got to know this, because you're going to venture off into a lifelong vocation of misleading people. And he told me, he said, you got to remember that the Bible is a historical record of people at that point in time. It's not representative of today. That culture and those people are dead. And the church only can be kept current and modern and applicable to today's generation by the Pope continuing to give us God's word and changes to it to keep the church modern and fresh. Otherwise, the church will die.
So really, his answer comes back to that very first question that Larry asked you, which is, what's your source of authority? And you said the Bible, and your friend essentially has said, well, it's the Pope, because the Bible isn't applicable now.
Yeah. And so, he said Catholics are just tradition-based people, as modern society is. Society doesn't have to live in the past, just as the church does not. And I remember saying, what about the Gospels? And he said, you remember, the Gospels were written at a point in time to people. Many of them aren't really necessarily accurate. They're love letters to the church that were to help guide the original church. We're well beyond that now. And I remember he just laughed at me and said, you'll be back. And that was the end of our conversation.
Wow. So, that must have been a really hard conversation for you.
Yeah, it was. And at the time, we didn't know all the other problems that were in the Catholic Church that are obviously the subject of lawsuits and very unspeakable things that have happened in the Catholic Church. But anyway, it's terrible. You have to basically leave all your friends. And of course, we met new friends and people who were solidly based in the faith, willing to study it out, willing to understand it, willing to give it to others, as opposed to Catholics that are hiding behind the priests and not willing to discuss it, not willing to let you study it, not willing to even give you the time to understand it, because if they did, you'd see the error of it. So anyway, I think, is there anything more that you remember? I think that's essentially our experience.
Okay. Well, that's huge. It's really helpful, I think, to a lot of people to be able to hear that and to realize that it's not an easy thing to leave a religious movement that you steeped your life in. But and for you guys, there were two things that it seemed like needed to be built. One, you needed to get answers and to see that there are actual answers.
Mhm.
And then you were cautious to trust people because you'd been burned by religious people who didn't give answers and just expected you to accept it on their word. And
Well,
that took 32 hours and then some, right?
I think if you remember when we started this, I told you my mom was mentally ill, so our family was somewhat dysfunctional. That Catholic Church was like a relative to me. It was an authority that had built a lot of, I had my confidence in.
Mm-hmm.
So when it failed, that took a lot of time to trust and believe somebody else could, you know, be truthful.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to be taken again.
I remember too
Fair.
that the first time we walked into a Church of Christ building, and I was just astounded that everything is so plain. Nobody's in robes. There's no banners. There's no candelabras.
There's no
There's no
incense.
pomp. There's no ceremony. Has no. I mean, the building is just basic and simple. It's not this big, huge architectural
There's no
artifice.
ambiance.
And I remember looking at that and thinking, wow, how different is, and then just thinking, but if you think about it, that's what Christ was when he didn't appear with pomp and ceremony. He was simple. He had the truth of life. And here's all these other charlatans trying to do something else with the robes, all the type of things, and making up all these rules for you that aren't consistent with the Word of God. And that's where all of a sudden this is where we belong, not in the theater that goes on in the Catholic Church.
Well, thank you both. And man, I don't think I could add anything to what you two have just said there in terms of what people need to hear. I don't think I could add anything to it. Thank you so much for your time. And, you guys know how much I love you. And I just hope everybody benefits a little bit from having a little bit of Rod and Denise in their life. Because as somebody who has benefited greatly from having you in my life, I know everybody could use an ounce.
Kind words.
We love you as well, and have mutual respect for you, and all the great work you're doing too.
Well, love you guys. Yeah, thank you for doing this. And this is another interview for Born Again, and we try and do these on Thursdays at 3:00. Thanks so much for listening.